Some stories don't start with a bang. They begin with a whisper, a fleeting image that you almost miss, but once you see it, you can never unsee it. This is one of those stories, and trust me, by the time we're done, you'll feel every single whisper and every single scream. This is the story of Sarah Jensen, a woman living in suburban Ohio, whose life seemed to be a perfect tapestry of routine and predictability. She was an art history professor, her days spent immersed in the quiet beauty of Renaissance paintings, her evenings a tranquil symphony of a shared meal with her husband, Mark, and a good book. They had built a life that was comfortable, secure, and utterly free of drama. It was, in a word, idyllic. But as we've learned here at Forgotten Ties, the most idyllic lives often hide the darkest secrets. Sarah's world was turned upside down not by a phone call, not by a knock at the door, but by a flickering image on her television screen. She was, as she often was on a Friday night, unwinding on the couch, half watching a new reality singing competition. The kind of show that's a dime a dozen, filled with hopefuls and sob stories. She was about to change the channel, her mind already drifting back to a particularly challenging chapter in her current manuscript, when the camera focused on a contestant's face. His name was Ethan, a young man with a soulful voice and a mop of sandy brown hair. He was being interviewed backstage, talking about his journey and the sacrifices his family had made for him. Sarah found herself drawn in, not by a story, but by a peculiar detail. As he gestured with his hand, the camera lingered for a moment on his wrist, and that's when she saw it. A small, irregularly shaped birthmark, a splash of deep brown against his pale skin. It was in a shape she knew intimately, a shape that had haunted her dreams and woken her in a cold sweat for 25 years. It was the exact birthmark her son, Liam, had on his wrist. Her son who had been lost to her in a tragic car accident a quarter of a century ago. It was a detail she hadn't seen on anyone else, a unique geographical marker on a body that had been taken from her far too soon. Her breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be. Liam was gone. He was a memory, a ghost in her mind. But the mark was so undeniably the same. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs. For years, Sarah had carried her grief like a heavy cloak. The accident had happened when Liam was just 3 years old. A simple family outing, a sudden swerve, and the world as she knew it shattered into a million pieces. The police report was clear: a drunk driver, a head-on collision, and a tragedy that left no survivors in her family's car. Or so she had been told. The body they had shown her had been so mangled. She had never been able to bring herself to look closely. The memories were a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and the crushing weight of loss. But now here was this boy on her television, with the same birthmark, the same gentle eyes, the same quiet smile she remembered from her son's baby pictures. It was impossible, illogical, a cruel twist of fate. Yet, a kernel of hope, a desperate, irrational hope, began to sprout in the desolate garden of her heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at her son. Her mind raced, sifting through the years, searching for any possible explanation. Could the police have been wrong? Was there a mistake? Or was this something far more sinister? The next day, Sarah found herself consumed by this new obsession. She replayed the clip of Ethan's interview over and over, zooming in on his wrist, tracing the lines of the birthmark with her finger on the screen. The shape was a perfect match. A constellation of sorrow and impossible possibility. She started digging, using her academic research skills to scour the internet for any information on Ethan. His age, his hometown, his family's history. Every detail she found seemed to scream coincidence, but she couldn't accept it. She was convinced there was a connection. A connection that would either bring her the greatest joy she had ever known or shatter her fragile reality into a million tiny, painful shards. This was more than a television show now. This was a mission. A quest to uncover a truth that had been buried for 25 years. A truth that began with a single unexplainable birthmark on a reality show contestant. The birthmark was a perfect match. Sarah knew it in her bones, a primal certainty that transcended logic. But her husband, Mark, was a man of logic. When she breathlessly told him about Ethan, about the identical birthmark, his face remained a mask of polite concern. He listened patiently as she recounted the story, his eyes gentle but his skepticism palpable. "Sarah," he said softly, "I know you're still grieving. It's been a long time, but it was a long time ago. People have similar birthmarks. It's just a coincidence." His words, meant to soothe, felt like a slap. He didn't understand. He hadn't seen the mark. He hadn't held their son, hadn't traced that peculiar little shape on his tiny wrist countless times. But Sarah couldn't blame him. Mark had come into her life 2 years after the accident, a beacon of stability and kindness who had helped her rebuild. He had never met Liam. To him, Liam was a story, a painful memory she rarely spoke of. He couldn't feel the pull, the magnetic, terrifying certainty that this young man on the television was not a stranger. Refusing to be dismissed, Sarah dove deeper. Her research became an all-consuming obsession. She found a grainy video of a local news report from the time of the accident. The footage was brief and chaotic, showing the crumpled wreckage of her family's car. But what caught her attention wasn't the car, it was a detail in the background. A group of firefighters and paramedics, and one in particular, a young man with a distinct facial scar. She cross-referenced the names of the first responders and found him, a now-retired paramedic named David Miller. He was living in a small town not far from where the accident had occurred. A cold sense of dread began to snake through her veins. Why was she so focused on him? It was a gut feeling, a chilling intuition that something was terribly wrong. She drove to his town, her heart thudding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. She found his address and parked her car down the street, watching his house from a distance. He was an old man now, stooped and slow, but the scar was unmistakable. She followed him to a local coffee shop, her mind a whirlwind of questions. Why was this man's face so familiar? Why was she so sure he was connected? As she watched him, she saw him pull out his phone and make a call. The conversation was brief, but she caught a few fragments. "The contest. I told you to be careful. She's watching." The words sent a jolt of electricity through her. She's watching. Who is watching? And who is he talking to? A sickening realization began to dawn on her. The fear was no longer a chill, it was a fire in her veins. She returned home, her mind racing. She went through old photographs, searching for any connection, any detail she might have missed. That's when she found it. Tucked away in a box of old mementos was a photograph of her husband, Mark, from his college days. He was with a group of friends, and standing next to him, with that same distinct facial scar, was a younger David Miller. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mark and David knew each other. But how? And why hadn't Mark ever mentioned it? The pieces of the puzzle, once disparate and confusing, were starting to snap together in a terrifying picture. Mark had been the first person on the scene of her son's accident. He was a part of the fire department's support crew at the time, a fact he had always vaguely mentioned but never elaborated on. He was the one who had helped identify the bodies. He was the one who had held her hand through the funeral. He was the one who had told her Liam was gone. He had built their life together on a foundation of lies. The love she felt for him began to curdle into a bitter, icy fear. The man who had saved her, who had brought her back from the brink of despair, might be the one who had taken her son away in the first place. The birthmark wasn't a coincidence. It was a breadcrumb, a trail leading back to a truth more monstrous than she could have ever imagined. The idyllic life she thought she had was nothing more than a carefully constructed cage, and she was the bird, trapped and oblivious. The truth, when it came, was not a slow unveiling, but a violent, shattering blow. Sarah's discovery of the photograph, the silent, terrifying confirmation that her husband, Mark, and the paramedic, David Miller, were connected, felt like a betrayal on a cosmic scale. She began to see her life through a new, grotesque lens. Every act of kindness, every shared laugh, every moment of comfort and love she had cherished was now poisoned by the sinister possibility that it was all a part of a long con, a sick, twisted performance designed to keep her in the dark. She couldn't confront Mark directly. Not yet. She needed more. The love she had for him was a tangled knot of confusion and doubt, but the survival instinct, the primal need to know what happened to her son, was stronger. She started to dig into Mark's past with the same quiet fury she had used to research Ethan and David. She found old records, news articles, and financial documents. And what she found was a portrait of a man she didn't know at all. Before he became a respected civil engineer, Mark had been struggling. He was drowning in debt from a failed business venture, facing bankruptcy. His family had a history of financial ruin, and he was desperate to break the cycle. That's when she found a connection to a wealthy, reclusive family known as the Wellingtons. The matriarch, Eleanor Wellington, was a famously eccentric millionaire who had a son who had been gravely ill since birth. The son, it turned out, was in desperate need of a bone marrow transplant. The details were murky, but the timing was chillingly precise. The Wellington family was desperately searching for a donor, and Mark, in his time of financial ruin, seemed to have been working for them in some capacity. A horrifying theory began to form in her mind, a theory so dark and twisted she almost couldn't bear to consider it. What if the accident hadn't been an accident at all? What if it had been orchestrated? What if her son, her beautiful, healthy 3-year-old boy, had been a perfect match for the Wellington's sick child? The pieces fit together with a terrible, sickening logic. Mark, desperate for money, and the paramedic, David, a man with a distinct scar and a motive to keep quiet. The accident would be the perfect cover. A tragedy that would leave no survivors, a perfect way to make a boy disappear. But the plan was flawed. The paramedics, in their haste and the chaos of the scene, had not realized that Liam, though severely injured, was still alive. They had simply taken him and his donors to a different hospital under a different name. The Wellington family, with their vast resources and influence, had made the disappearance easy. They had falsified records, bribed officials, and buried the truth so deep it had become a ghost story. The Wellingtons had gotten their donor, their son was saved, and the accident became just another tragic headline. Mark and David, having orchestrated this, were now living comfortable lives, their hands clean, their conscience, or what was left of it, a ghost they buried long ago. The reality show, with its worldwide reach, was an unforeseen variable. Ethan, now an adult, had no idea of the dark history that had brought him to this point. He was living under a new name, with a new family, his past a carefully constructed lie. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know was being played. The birthmark, once an insignificant detail, was now a ticking time bomb. Sarah's fear turned to a cold, hard rage. She was a mother, and they had taken her son. She had spent a quarter of a century mourning a child who was not dead, but stolen. The pain of the loss was now a burning fury, a fire that consumed her every waking thought. She was not just a grieving mother, she was a victim of a monstrous conspiracy, and she was not going to let them get away with it. Her idyllic life, a beautiful prison, was about to be torn down, and she was the one holding the hammer. The final act of this chilling drama began with a simple confrontation. Sarah couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. The weight of the secret, the venom of the betrayal, was too much to bear. She waited for Mark to come home, her hands trembling as she held the old college photograph. When he walked in the door, his usual warm smile on his face, she felt a wave of nausea. "Mark," she said, her voice a whisper, "who is this man?" She held up the photograph, her finger tracing the scar on David Miller's face. The smile on Mark's face faltered, then vanished. His eyes, once so full of love, filled with a sudden, icy panic. "I don't know who you're talking about," he said, his voice strained. But the lie was a flimsy veil. Sarah, her voice gaining strength, pushed on. "Don't lie to me. I know you know him. I know you were there. I know what you did." The dam of his carefully constructed reality broke. His face crumbled, the mask of the loving husband replaced by the desperate, terrified face of a man caught in a lie. He tried to explain, to rationalize, to beg for forgiveness, but his words were a cacophony of excuses that did nothing to soothe the rage in her heart. He confessed to everything. The debt, the deal with the Wellingtons, the orchestration of the accident. He confessed to seeing a little boy, her son, still breathing, still alive, and making the decision to hand him over a human sacrifice for his financial salvation. Her world, already shattered, was now a pile of smoking rubble. She had loved this man. She had trusted him with her heart, with her life. And he had taken her son and sold him like a piece of property. The pain was so profound, it was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. But the story didn't end there. Sarah, armed with her husband's confession and the evidence she had gathered, went to the authorities. The scandal was massive, a news story that captivated the nation. The Wellingtons, a family once thought to be untouchable, were now under investigation. The reality show, the very thing that had brought this all to light, became a platform for the truth. Ethan's true identity was revealed, and the world watched in stunned silence as a young man who thought he was an orphan was reunited with the mother who had mourned him for 25 years. The reunion was not a simple, tearful embrace. It was a complex and emotional journey, a process of healing a wound that had festered for a quarter of a century. Ethan, whose life had been a lie, had to come to terms with the fact that his parents were his captors. Sarah, whose heart had been a graveyard of sorrow, had to learn how to love a son who was now a stranger. The birthmark, once a mark of tragedy, was now a symbol of a miracle, a small, beautiful detail that had led them back to each other. The story of the birthmark, of the grieving mother and the stolen son, became a phenomenon. Here at Forgotten Ties, we believe that every story has a hidden truth, a secret waiting to be uncovered. This one was more unbelievable than most, a chilling tale of greed, betrayal, and a mother's undying love. If this story resonated with you, if it left you on the edge of your seat, then you're in the right place. Be sure to hit that like button to show your support, subscribe to the Forgotten Ties channel for more stories like this, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the truth. Thank you for watching.